All right, we got it. Okay, so we left off with Francis Perkins. Everybody should be ready. And again, I'm going to try to get you through this as quick as possible. Everybody should be ready. You got to pull up the notes at least? Let's get there. Let's get there. Let's get there. All right. And I have notes here so that I know exactly how many questions you have. We're going to get through this as quickly as possible. All right. So we left off with Frances Perkins. We just want to remember that she was the first female cabinet member, that she served for 12 years in a very significant role for the president, FDR, during the Great Depression. And she's going to be somebody that you may experience on the test. So let's get ready to start right here. So let's take ourselves back to the 1930s. Let's take ourselves back to some of the causes of the Great Depression. One of the causes was bank failure. And we saw that banks weren't regulated by the government, and that banks were taking in people's money, but then they were also investing that money in other places. So when the economy begins to collapse and the stock market begins to collapse and people become unemployed, everybody tries to go get their life savings out of the bank. They need the life savings to survive on. They don't trust the banks. They all try to get their cash out. Well, the bank at no time has everybody's cash. If everybody put their cash into the bank, well, the bank loans it out. That doesn't mean that they have actually your bank, your cash in their vaults. So the first thing FDR has to do is fix the banks. And that's what we're going to focus on right now. The banks failed. The banks lost people's life savings. People were just left out to hang dry, and they didn't have any ability to claim their money. Once the banks went down, they lost their money. So the first thing FDR wants to do is fix the banking system. So let's just kind of read through this. You're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 notes here. It's going to ask you, what does FDR do to restore confidence? It's going to ask you, what does the Banking Relief Act do? It's going to ask you, what do government officials do to the banks? And then it's going to ask you, what did the government officials do if the banks were found to be financially sound? So let me read through this and let's get it going. So FDR, the president, initiates the act in order to restore confidence in the banking industry. Once the banks fail, people are left out to dry, left out to, in the cold with no money. People lose their confidence in banks. And like we said on Tuesday, they begin to invest their money. They begin to store their money in coffee cans. They begin to put it under their mattresses. They begin to put it in holes in the ground. They begin to put it in their walls because they don't trust that the banks will always be there to keep their cash. So what does the Banking Relief Act do? It closes all the banks in the United States. That's what the second bullet's telling you. It closes every bank in the United States. And when it says it's called a bank holiday, we'll see it on the next slide. But it wasn't just for 1 or 2 days. It wasn't for a week. It wasn't for 2 weeks. The banks were closed permanently until they could prove that they were financially sound. So what he does is he closes every bank in the United States, and then he goes to evaluate them. He sends out government officials to inspect and evaluate these banks. The banks that were found to be run poorly, the banks that were found to have really dropped the ball and really lost people all their life savings, those banks weren't allowed to reopen. The banks could reopen. If you look at the last bullet, the banks could reopen if they passed the evaluation, if they passed the test. And if they were found to be financially sound, the banks could reopen. Okay. And this is going to be something that tries to restore the confidence of people in the banking systems. If FDR got rid of all the bad banks and only allowed the good banks to reopen, well, now you could have the confidence to go deposit your money in the bank, that you would have the confidence to go get a loan from that bank, and that you could trust that that bank is doing the things that it needs to do to stay open. So let's move to the next slide. You ready? I know I talked a lot there. Bank holiday, it's the same thing. Bank holiday means that he closed all the banks. And again, it's not for Martin Luther King Day. It's for an indefinite amount of time until you can prove that you're ready to open. So FDR closes the banks, and he's trying to, again, restore the American people's confidence in the banking industry. And only when those banks can prove that they're financially sound, only after they can pass the test, the evaluation, or the inspection by the government, are they allowed to reopen. And so what you need to know is on the other side of this bank holiday, the banks that reopened are the banks that you can trust. That's the idea. The banks that you couldn't trust, they no longer exist. The banks that you can trust, we're going to reopen them. So when they say holiday, it's not for 1 or 2 days. It's not a 3-day weekend. It's more of this idea that we're going to close these banks indefinitely, and we're not going to reopen these banks until they can prove that they're not going to lose your money. All right. Now, this was one note, so you should be ready to go here in a second. And I think I found my ability to speak without stuttering. Here we go. Fireside chats. FDR, this is the president FDR. And the best way that he had to communicate with the American people during this time period was through the radio. During the 1920s, many Americans bought radios. It was a foundational piece of their entertainment. It was a big part of their homes. And every night, people would listen to their radio shows as a form of entertainment. And so what FDR does is he realizes that he can directly communicate with the people through the radio. So instead of people having to open up the newspaper to read his speeches, instead of people having to read the newspaper to understand his plan for the country to pull us out of the Depression, now they could hear it directly through the radio. They could hear his voice. They could hear the confidence in his voice. They could hear his tone of voice. They could hear his optimism. And so we call these fireside chats, and it's usually people at their homes, sit next to the fireplace, listening to the radio, and now they have access to FDR's voice, his communication. Presidents nowadays, of course, use social media. They use Twitter. They use all these other platforms to communicate what they want you to understand. During the 1920s, the 1930s, and the 1940s, the best way to understand what your president was trying to do for your country was to turn on your radio. We call these fireside chats, and it says that millions of people are going to listen. He speaks to the American people with a conversational tone. So he's not freaking out. He's not scared. He's not banging on the desk like Hitler or Stalin across the ocean. And he's just very optimistic. He's explaining his game plan. He's explaining exactly what he's trying to do to pull the American people out of the Great Depression. Third bullet, he assures the American people that it was now safe to keep their money in banks and deposits began to outweigh withdrawals. So after he closes the banks and after he promises the American people through the radio that you can trust the banks, people start to use the banks again. They start to deposit their money back in the banks. And now the banks can operate by giving people loans for their homes, giving people loans for their new Fords, whatever. We can kind of repair the economy and get ourselves going back the other direction, where not only do you have to have the cash to pay your mortgage, but now you can also take a loan and pay it off. Everything can be more stable. I'm already lost. All right, let's keep rolling. The gold standard. The gold standard. Once upon a time, the United States would collect gold, and they had their gold stored in a vault. And the way that they would issue paper money and cash was to have that exact amount of gold available. And so the first thing that FDR tries to do is they try to take the American economy off of the gold standard. And we're not the only country to do this during the Great Depression. And I know it's kind of hard to understand this. But instead of gold being what backs the U.S. currency, now we're going to kind of take Americans off the gold standard, and we're just going to kind of depend on cash. And cash is what we call fiat money. So it says Congress takes the United States off the gold standard. We no longer have to have this amount of gold in the vault to have this amount of cash. Now we're going to depend on cash or paper currency or fiat money, and it's going to be the legal tender for the United States, meaning this is how you buy things. What happens is they make it illegal for you to own gold. People actually used to own gold bricks, and they would store them in their homes, and they would keep them safe. Just in case a rainy day would occur, they could sell that gold, and they would be able to survive. Now it's illegal to own these big gold bricks. So what people had to do is they had to take their gold bricks back to the U.S. Treasury. They would bring it into the vaults, and they would issue you cash. They would buy the gold back from you. And so the only way that you could actually own gold is if you had a gold watch or a necklace or some earrings. If you had jewelry, you couldn't own gold. But if you were collecting gold bars like you see in this image, that was now going to be illegal. You needed to turn that into the U.S. government so that they could print you some cash. Now, why do they do this? This is all you have to understand. They do this so that they can control deflation. During the Great Depression, if you were in Germany, it might cost you $4,000 to buy a loaf of bread. And that's because their money was found to be worthless. And their money was found to be worthless because it was connected to this gold standard. So the United States decides, well, if we just get rid of the gold standard, we can kind of control how much money we have in circulation. And therefore, we can kind of control the price of things like bread, gasoline, and so forth and so on. So just understand that this is just a step that they take to ensure that the value of your money is not devalued to where you're having to pay $5,000 for a loaf of bread. The Securities Act. And I am lost in my notes. Alt with the bracket. So alt with the bracket, whichever direction you want to go with it. Here we go. Now I see my notes. All right, let's try to get through this pretty quickly as well. All right, so the Securities Act is going to require companies who sell stocks and bonds. So this is related to the stock exchange. In order for you to sell your stocks and bonds now, you have to be completely truthful. You have to be completely honest with your investors. You cannot kind of dupe them or trick them into investing in something that's not sound. And so all this is doing is regulating the stock market. It's making sure that you don't buy bad stocks that are going to bankrupt you. So there's a lot of words there. There's a lot of connotation behind this, but all you have to understand is that the government, FDR, is trying to prevent what happened in the Great Depression. He's trying to prevent it from happening again. So the Securities Act, the Securities and Exchange Commission, is just there to kind of regulate the stock market, to make sure that when people buy their stocks, that they're not buying bad stocks. You guys remember Martha Stewart? You know who that is? The white lady that hangs out with Snoop Dogg all the time? Well, she went to jail because she was doing some stuff in the stock market that she shouldn't have been doing. It was the SEC that actually put her into jail because she had insider information. So all this is doing is the government is now trying to regulate the stock market. They're trying to make sure that people aren't cheating. They're trying to make sure that people aren't being taken advantage of. They're just trying to make sure that it's kind of fair so that we don't see another epic stock market collapse like we did in 1929. So what was it created to regulate? What was created to regulate the stock market? It's just the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. All right. And again, a lot of this stuff is going to go in one ear and out the other. You just got to understand that the government is trying to take action to prevent what happened in 1929. They're trying to prevent it from happening again. There's only 2 notes there. I think we're ready to go. Let's keep the pace up as well as we can. Again, another act passed by the government that's going to try to prevent the banking system from failing again. And so the Glass-Steagall Act, it says that it's going to separate commercial from investment banking. What does that mean? It means that banks used to do both. They used to give you your mortgages. They used to take your deposits. They used to give you credit. They used to do everything for the stock market as well. And that was what was dangerous. When those banks were doing things in the stock market and the stock market collapsed, that's when the banks collapsed. So now they're just going to try to separate them. You're going to have one branch for the investment banking, things that you can do to take loans out for your business, things that you can do to take loans out for big purchases, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're going to separate those from kind of the regular everyday banking things that we do. So it says in the second bullet, commercial banks will handle your everyday transactions, your deposits, your withdrawals. They help you pay your light bill, all that type of stuff. But there's another branch, the investment banking branch, that's going to do some more heavy lifting. So they just try to separate them just in case the investment banking collapses. It doesn't take all of your life savings and throw it down the drain. And the very third bullet, the last bullet, is what's most important. That's what we see on the next slide, the FDIC. So now that if a bank goes under and it collapses, you don't lose your life savings. They have insurance for your deposits. All the money that you deposited into the bank, if the bank were to fail, you still get your money back. And that's what we see on this slide right here, the FDIC. If you have a job and you have a bank account, you've probably seen this image on a sticker on the window of your bank as you entered the bank. And it says FDIC, and that stands for Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And it was created by the federal government to ensure that you don't lose your life savings, that you can trust putting your money in a bank. And if that bank goes out of business, well, that's too bad for that bank. I'm still going to get my cash back. So it's like an insurance policy for the money you put in the bank. And it insures you up to $250,000. So if you had $250,000 in the bank and the bank went bankrupt, then you could get your $250,000. But if you had $300,000 and the bank were to collapse, well, you would lose 50 grand because they would split you a check for 250 grand. So up until 250 grand, anything you have in the bank, you'll get it back. And this ensures the American people that they can trust the banks again, that they can put their life savings in the bank and not lose it all. And it's an insurance policy, and it's created by the federal government. Look at the name, Federal Deposit Insurance. The federal government creates this agency to protect your deposits that you put in the bank with an insurance check. So if things crap out, they'll send you a check up to $250,000. And again, if you had more than that in the bank, you would lose some money because they were only going to give you a check for 250 grand. Third bullet, the FDIC was established to prevent catastrophic repercussions of failed banks. It means it's just to try to prevent the terrible disaster of what the banks went through in the stock market crash. Is trying to prevent that from happening again. So that's your last note there. What was established? The FDIC. The FDIC was established to prevent catastrophic repercussions of failed banks for their depositors in order to prevent the reoccurrence of the banking situation during the Great Depression. It just means we don't want that crap to happen again. And if you find confidence in our banks and you invest in our banks and you put your money in our banks, we got an insurance policy for you just in case crap goes down the drain. And again, I'm trying to keep a fast pace here. I know you don't want to hear me talk. All right. This is where we get to the alphabet agencies. And the reason we call them alphabet agencies is because they have these acronyms. Like this is the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, but they just called it the AAA. and you have the triple C, and you have the TVA, and you have all these things that are acronyms with these letters. And that's why they call them alphabet agencies. And you're about to see a few of them, and you're going to see a lot of them in the near pod. And the only thing you have to understand is that these were programs that were made by the government to get people back to work, to get people back to having some money in their pocket, to get the economy back rolling in the right direction. So all the alphabet agencies that we're about to overview, you might not remember exactly what they did. You can tell by the name that the Agricultural Adjustment Administration probably has something to do with the farmers. But you don't have to remember every single detail. You just have to remember these are the programs, the alphabet agencies. These are the programs that the government is going to produce to try to get you back on your feet, get you back to work. So let's just kind of go through them. You're not going to necessarily have to remember word for word what they are. You just got to understand what were they meant to do. They were meant to pull us out of the depression. First one says crop prices were very low. And in an attempt to bring up the price of crops, the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, was established by the government. Second bullet, the government paid people not to grow as many crops. And the third bullet, many tenant farmers lost their jobs as farmers sought to grow less food. So if the price of corn is very low, it's because everybody in the Great Plains is growing corn. And so what they do is if everybody's growing corn, you have corn everywhere, the price is going to go down because it's not that hard to find. It's a supply and demand thing. And so all you have to understand is they were paying people not to grow corn. They were paying people not to grow wheat. And therefore, the price of corn and the price of wheat would come up, and then the farmers could be more successful. The poorest farmers actually lost their jobs. When they say tenant farmers, those are your poor farmers. All right, again, alphabet agencies, triple C's right here. Civil Conservation Corps. And you're not going to remember everything about it, but you need to remember that it is intended to put people back to work. So it is a New Deal program. It's a relief program. And it's really for young people. It's for young people just like you. These young people don't have families. These young people aren't married. They don't have kids that depend on them, but they need to go to work. And so they have this conservation corps of American people who are going to kind of travel the country, and they're going to do these odd jobs, and it's just going to put people back to work. The government's going to invest, and it's going to pay these people to build things that we already need, things like trails, railroads, schools, that type of stuff. So it says that it's a New Deal program. It's an alphabet agency. Young men are joining this program. They're going to plant trees. They're going to build trails. They're going to provide the structures for national parks. They kind of migrate together. They live in these camps. They're paid $30 a month. And they send most of their money back home to their parents because they have a place to sleep. They have a organization that's going to feed them. And so all they have to do is work hard and try to send that money back home to mom and pa so they can pay the mortgage. And it's kind of like the Job Corps today, where they're still going to be kind of responsible for educating these young people. People are going to learn things. They're going to learn how to read and write, and they're going to have a job. They're going to have some stability, some structure. And they're even going to be able to send some money back home to help their parents out. That's the Triple C. It's an alphabet agency. And it's intended to get people back to work.
Coach, I got to go take my son to the dentist.
Okay. This will be recorded and posted for you. I still need it by tomorrow, all right?
Okay.
Thank you. Now, the next slide you actually don't have a note for. This is the Public Works Administration. I just like the map. If you look at the map and you were able to zoom in, you would see all these kind of graphics, illustrations of things that the government paid to have produced during the Great Depression. The government invested in the United States. All these little things you see here, the government was going to pay people to go to work and produce these things. And so it was just a way to put people back to work. You don't have a note for this, but it's called the Public Works Administration. So you understand that they're creating public works. 1/3 of the country was unemployed. We put them back to work by asking them to build these things. They built railroads, they built airports, they built schools, they built bridges, they built highways, they built dams like the Hoover Dam. That was a part of the PWA. So this is not a note for you, but it's an alphabet agency, and just like the other ones, it's intended to get people back on their feet. This one, however, you do have a note for. What did I do? And it's the Works Progress Administration. Now, hear what I'm saying to you. Your note-taking guide doesn't have all the answers. It has more questions than this slide has answers. You're not going to be able to fill these out. So let me just read this and move through it. If you have all your WPAs, if some of those are blank, I understand why. The WPA was formed in 1935, right in the middle of the Depression. It is the most famous of the New Deal programs. 8.5 million Americans were employed, and this employs a different type of worker. See, the other stuff kind of provided work for hard laborers, people who are going to be in construction, people who are going to work hard, back-breaking labor. The WPA is going to try to put back into work educated people, people who went to school, people who have training as artists, and people who have training as writers and directors, and kind of this educated class of people who were also unemployed. So it asks people to do works of art. It asks people to do sculptures. It asks people to do murals. It asks people to write books. It asks people to do all kinds of things in this art sector of the economy. So the only thing that you could really answer here is that it was formed in 1935. It put 8.5 million people back to work. And that's about it. It employs artists, and it employs writers, and it employs people who have educated skill sets, people who aren't construction workers. So let's just move to the next one, the Civil Works Administration. Go ahead and go all the way down. Let's keep this thing rolling. Hopefully we can get done here in about 5 to 10 minutes. The Civil Works Administration, another alphabet agency known as the CWA, and just like the other ones, it's going to put people back to work. That's why I'm saying they're all so similar that you don't really have to know all the very specific details. You just have to know that they're putting Americans back to work. Now, a lot of people felt like the government didn't have this right. You know, the laissez-faire people didn't believe that the government had the right to interfere with the economy. And FDR is kind of dumping that on its head, and he's actually investing all throughout the country in different ways to put people back to work. So it asks you, what was the Civil Works Administration also called? It was also known as the CWA. What did people working in the CWA build? They built things just like the WPA and the other ones. They built schools, parks, roads, airports, things of the such, you know. So go ahead and get those two notes real quick. And again, keep it simple for yourself. We're just trying to get Americans back to work. If Americans get back to work, they can put some money in their pocket. They're going to go to the stores. They're going to spend that money. They're going to go to the movie theaters. They're going to spend that money, and it's going to start putting that money back into circulation. The entire economy will heal if people have some money to spend. They're going to go to Whataburger instead of making their Whataburgers at the house. Francis Townsend. All right, you don't care about this guy right now because you're 16 years old, but this is the father of Social Security. He is a physician, meaning a doctor from California, and what he wanted to do was take care of old people. He wanted to take care of the senior citizens, the elderly, the people who couldn't go work and build dams, and the people who were, just kind of at this age where it wouldn't be feasible for them to go work for the rest of their lives until they die. So he's kind of the father of Social Security. If you look at the second bullet, he says that he wants the government to pay people over the age of 60 $200 a month. He wants people who get to this retirement age to still have this safety net, to have this ability to get a check from the government, still be able to pay their rent, still be able to buy some groceries, still be able to survive. And so he's kind of the father of Social Security. He believes that this would increase spending and create jobs. If you want to put money in everybody's pocket, everybody can spend it, even the senior citizens. So if you got to the end of your life and you didn't have a nest egg, or if you lost all of your life savings in the Great Depression, then, now we have a safety net. Okay, now let's move over and let's keep talking. But who is Francis Townsend? He was a doctor from California. What did he want the government to do? He wanted to pay senior citizens or people over the age of 60 a monthly stipend. And what does he do? What does he believe? He believes that this is going to improve the economy. It's going to increase spending and create jobs. $200 was a lot back then. The minimum wage was 25 cents an hour. So you work 4 hours, you get $1. You work 40 hours, you getting what, $10? So yeah, $200 was quite a bit. Let's keep it rolling. The Wagner Act, also known as the National Labor Relations Act. Again, just the government trying to produce these programs to get people back to work, get people back on their feet. What does this do? It guarantees workers the right to unionize. So up until this point in U.S. history, we see that unions and the factory owners are constantly clashing. That people want 8-hour work days. They want safer working conditions. They want more money, that they're always clashing. And up until this point, the government had really not backed the unions. But now the federal government, the president, and everybody else is saying you have the right to unionize, and that you should unionize, that you should collective bargain, meaning that as a group, you should tell and demand your employers to pay you more money. And so let me just read the third bullet. You take your notes and we'll keep it going. But again, it's just another New Deal program intended to kind of right the ship. And now you can unionize and you can demand more money, more wages, better working conditions, so forth and so on. The third bullet says that it sets up something called arbitration. And arbitration is like a hearing where the workers and the factory owners, they can go into this meeting, they can talk to this neutral party, and he would listen to their problems and he would determine who was right. Was it the union that should get this, or was it the factory owners that should get this. So what is arbitration? It's just this. It's a way for you to present your argument without having bloodshed, violence, guns, that type of stuff. So one more time, let me just read it and we'll keep it rolling. Sets up arbitration where unions can take their complaints to a neutral party like a judge. The judge would listen to both sides and then he would decide on the issue. They do the same thing for baseball contracts. You good, homie? Just need somewhere to be. What I really want to get to is the Social Security, and after that, we only got a few more slides. So let's just keep it rolling. Social Security Act. This is still in play today. Everybody has a Social Security card because as soon as you start working, you're going to pay a small tax. That tax is going to collect over your lifetime, and when you hit retirement age, the government is going to send you a check. And so a lot of people want to end up at 65 years old with a retirement from a nice company like Bell Helicopter or the Fort Worth ISD. You want to have that retirement, but you also want to collect your Social Security. Some people get to 65 years old and they don't have a retirement. All they can depend on is their Social Security check. But this is something that's established during the Great Depression. This is something that is kind of connected to that Francis Townsend who said that he wanted to pay $200 to people over the age of 60. That's where this comes from, and this is still in play today. All right, so let me read down this. You got several notes here. It says it provides financial security for the elderly, the unemployed, and others. When they say others, they mean people who have become disabled, people who were tragically disabled, or people who were born disabled, people who can't quite work. Now they have some financial security. They have a safety net that they can kind of depend on as they get into their working age. So workers earn the benefits by paying special taxes to the government. Most of you guys have a job right now. If you look at your paycheck stub and it says Social Security, that's what you're paying into. You're paying into this fund that you expect to get back when you hit 65. So what happens if you die at 64? Nothing. You don't get that money. Your kids don't get that money. It just goes back in the pot. So everybody kind of puts money in the pot. And if you are lucky enough to make it to 65, they're going to start sending you a check until you die, right? So when workers get paid, Social Security is deducted from their paycheck. Welfare is also provided to people with disabilities. So if you lose a limb, if you have become paralyzed, if you are mentally disabled, they have a way for you to receive some sort of supplemental income. Yeah. Benefits are dispersed at the age of 65. You got to make it to 65 to get this, right? Most people were dying before 65. So the government was kind of like, okay, we're going to play this game with you. If you can make it to past 65, we'll pay you some money. Social Security dramatically changes the role of the federal government. Never before has the federal government been responsible for sending you a check. Never before has the federal government been responsible for you having a paycheck so that you can survive in your old age. So it is seen as an entitlement program, and it is a type of welfare. So when they ask you on that last note, what was Social Security considered to be? It was considered to be welfare, and it was considered to be social welfare. And this is the first time where the federal government ever really puts that on the docket and votes on it and passes it. This is the first form of welfare ever. So in the other alphabet agencies, they're just trying to put you back to work. They're not trying to give you an unemployment check. They're trying to give you employment. But in this instance, they're trying to actually give you a stimulus of sorts. We're good? Okay. I'm not trying to move too fast, but I know y'all tired of hearing me talk. And again, that's why our next lesson, you'll be talking. All right, our next slide only has 2 notes. And I'll just kind of preview it while they're catching up on the notes. You may be catching up on your notes as well. FDR ran for president in 32, beat Herbert Hoover bad. By the time we get to 1936, 4 years later, the entire majority of American people believe in FDR. They believe in his leadership. They believe in what he's done. They've been impacted and affected by some of the moves he's made. And so he wins the 1936 election in a landslide. Millions of Americans owed their jobs, their homes, their bank accounts, their livelihood to the New Deal. The New Deal is a big deal. This is the first time the government is saying, yo, we got to stop the bleeding. And they start to do all these things they've never done before. And it says right there very specifically in the first bullet that Americans owed their livelihood to the New Deal, that they owed the fact that they had a home and food and that they had a job. A lot of people owed that to the New Deal. So like we said, the next bullet says that because of that, FDR wins in a landslide. 60% of the American people vote for FDR, which is considered to be a significant victory. You only have 2 notes there, so go ahead and get those real quick and we'll keep it rolling. It's 12:15. That was pretty quick, right? You got those? All right, let's keep it rolling. Supreme Court and the New Deal. So here's what you have to understand. This is what the political cartoon is showing you. That's FDR. You know he couldn't walk. Homeboy couldn't even bend his knees. But in the political cartoon, he's got this cane. Remember, the American people didn't know exactly how paralyzed he was. But you see him walking up these steps, and he's a president. But when he gets up to that top seat, what does that say? What does it say? Somebody just read the word. Dictator. So they're saying that the president is overstepping his boundaries, that he is doing things that he's not supposed to do. He's not supposed to interfere in the economy. He's not supposed to guarantee welfare. He's not supposed to have this control. And so he's an American president who has to live and die by the rules in the Constitution. And they feel like he is doing more than he's allowed to, that he's trying to take this power and he's trying to make the presidency more powerful. And all it's saying, you know, across the ocean in Europe right now, you have the rise of fascism. You have Benito Mussolini. You have Adolf Hitler. You have Joseph Stalin. These people are real dictators. And so they're saying that FDR is just doing too much. So he has some opponents, people who didn't think that what he was doing was legal. 60% of the Americans owe their livelihood to FDR and the New Deal. The other 40% or the Supreme Court or people who are really into the Constitution, they believe that what he's doing is illegal. So when you look at this political cartoon, they're just saying that he is rising above what a president is, and he's trying to become this dictator. All right, so let's just read the bullets, but it's just to simply understand that no president had ever done this before. And so we didn't even know if what he was doing was legal. Is this allowed? Is this something that he's allowed to do? So the first bullet says that the Supreme Court did not like what he was doing. The justices who are there to interpret the law are saying that what FDR is doing is illegal. They don't like what he's doing. It's not something that he should be allowed to do. Second bullet, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the AAA, they find that to be unconstitutional. So one of his alphabet agencies is illegal. You can't tell farmers not to grow food and then put poor farmers off their farms and make them desolate. So it was actually illegal for him to do that. But a lot of the things were found to be constitutional. The Security Act was legal. The Wagner Act, where people could join unions, that was legal. But what you have to understand is that the Supreme Court is going to test FDR. They're going to say, hey, that's not allowed, this is allowed, this is allowed. And they're going to try to slow him down. What FDR does is he tries to upset the entire Supreme Court by adding 6 new judges. These 6 new judges would be his homeboys, and they would go into the Supreme Court with this mindset that what FDR is doing is legal. This really hurts his reputation because this does make him look like a dictator. When the Supreme Court tries to check his power and say what you're doing is illegal, he says, well, let me just add some people to the Supreme Court that agree with me. That is not the way that the branches of government were set up. So it does hurt his reputation a little bit. You see a lot of political cartoons of people calling him a king, a dictator, that he's doing more than a president should. But because it was a time of drastic problems, he had to take some drastic measures. And so just know that not everybody was cool with what he was doing. FDR helped a lot of people. He helped mostly hardworking poor people. But on the other side, people found what he was doing was not actually legal. And it hurts his reputation. We're almost there, people. We're on the last page of notes. You will see that political cartoon on benchmarks. You will see that political cartoon on STAR tests. And it's just to understand that homeboy was doing a little too much, and he kind of ruffled the feathers of the other branches of government. Eleanor Roosevelt. That's a handsome woman. This is actually the best I've ever seen her look. Most times she's not that handsome. She's not that pretty. Remember that this was FDR's 5th cousin, and this is his wife. Before they got married, and we talked about this last class, her name was Eleanor Roosevelt. That was her maiden name. And when she married Franklin Roosevelt, she didn't have to change her last name because they were in the same family tree. They were 5th cousins removed. All right. They had 6 children. The children didn't have extra pinkies or extra toes. Okay. There was no genetic deformations, but they were actually in the same family tree. And she was actually the niece of Theodore Roosevelt, the president in the early 1900s. But she's not just his wife. She is like the first lady superstar of the United States. She's very active as a first lady. She's a lot like Michelle Obama, where she found, her role to be significant. She would travel the country separate from her husband, and she would have speeches and she would do things for people and not just sit there and look pretty, right? So she's an advocate for women's rights. She's an advocate for peace. She's an advocate for the poor. She's an advocate for people who are suffering in the Great Depression. She travels the nation on her own, and she gives her own speeches, and she becomes kind of like this partner in crime for FDR. All right. And she encourages FDR to improve low income housing. She wants to make sure that people are moving out of these Hoovervilles, out of these shanties and these shacks, and that they have somewhere to go. So, she's actually very, very popular in American history. And, she changes the role of the first lady, the president's wife, forever until you get to the Trumps. What does she encourage FDR to do? She encourages him to improve housing for low-income families. And that leads us to our next slide, the National Housing Act. The National Housing Act establishes the U.S. Housing Authority, which is just a department. Again, a lot of different names, a lot of different alphabet agencies, a lot of different acronyms. And the Housing Authority is going to start to build low-cost housing. So you see these like 2-bedroom houses. They got 1 bathroom. They're kind of cheap to make, and they're easy to move people into. So these people who are getting back on their feet, they're moving out of the Hoovervilles, they're moving out of the shanties, and now they have some place to go. Okay, and to this day, we still have housing departments, urban development, all kinds of stuff that are there to guarantee that people who are on the lower side of the socioeconomic spectrum have somewhere to live. And it's very similar to through the 70s, they started building the housing projects, which we find to be kind of a turn away from this. But it's the same concept. We need to provide low-cost housing to people who need housing. We only got 2 more slides, people. Yeah, I know, man. I know. Let's keep it rolling. So you got 3 notes here. What did the Fair Labor Standards Act abolish? So what did they get rid of? What did the Fair Labor and Standards Act limit? And what did the Fair Labor and Standards Act set the minimum wage? So they abolished child labor. So now you have to be 16 to have a job, point blank, period, no matter what. During the progressive era, we see that they kind of get away from child labor, but it wasn't illegal. Now it's illegal. Second bullet, they're going to limit your work week to 44 hours. You can still work over 40 hours. You can still work over 44 hours, but you're going to have to receive overtime pay. So it kind of sets that into law. And the last thing is it sets the minimum wage to $0.25 an hour, 25 cents an hour. And therefore you couldn't be, paid less than that. So of course you wanted a job that made more than that, but you couldn't be paid less than that. Abolishes child labor, limits the work week to 44 hours, sets the minimum wage to 25 cents. We got 1 more slide. The Tennessee Valley Authority. This is another alphabet agency, the TVA. And it's very similar to socialism. It's very similar to communism because the government owns this entity. So it's not owned by a private citizen. It's not owned by competitive capitalistic companies. It's owned by the government. But it is going to try to do 2 things. When we talk about the Tennessee Valley, we're really talking about the Appalachian Mountains. And the Appalachian Mountains is where we find some of the poorest people in the United States living at this time. And they were mostly white people. They were the poorest white people in the country. My wife is from here, and that's why I always talk about her being a hillbilly, not wearing shoes and stuff. They come from a very poor place. And the government was trying to stimulate the economy here by getting people to work. They were going to ask them to build dams along the Tennessee River. The Tennessee River is a very, very large river. And they're going to build these dams to do a couple things. They're going to control flooding, so people aren't having to restart their lives every time there's a flood. But it's also going to use those dams to produce electricity. Those are hydroelectric dams. And so because people in the Tennessee Valley didn't have electricity in the 1930s, they said we can do a couple things here. We can put people to work. We can build these infrastructures, these dams to kind of control flooding, and we can use the dams to provide electricity to some of the poorest people in the country who don't have electricity. So the flaw in it was that the government owned it, and it was seen to be a form of socialism where the government owns these things and they profit from these things. It should have been something that was owned by a private citizen. So what's up, man? Have a good one, bro. So where were the dams built? Along the Tennessee River. What did the dams control? Flooding, and they provided electricity. And what did people fear about it? They feared that it was a form of socialism, that the government should not be owning that stuff. So a lot of you are missing some notes, and I understand that. I'm still going to go back and open up every single one of your Google Docs and see that you've been doing what I asked you to do. If you have a blank Google Doc, we're going to have a problem. But I am also about to post this video, and I'm also about to just post the straight up the PowerPoint. So your job is to fill in those missing blanks and have this submitted by tomorrow in your note-taking guide. And your job from this point on needs to be opening up and completing our Nearpod. So if you go to classwork right there, I'm about to edit this assignment. I'm about to add a video and a PowerPoint. So if you're missing some blanks, it'll be there for you here in about 5 minutes. For the rest of the class, however, you want to complete this Nearpod. This Nearpod is going to go over a lot of the same information of the alphabet agencies, just understanding that the federal government was trying to put people back to work. So we need all of this stuff, including the stuff from Tuesday. We need all of that submitted by tomorrow at the end of class or the end of the school day. I know I won't see you tomorrow, but I'm trying to give you kind of a cushion here. But if you don't have it all to me by tomorrow, you're going to start having some points deduced. Questions? You skipped a slide. Well, that was about 40 minutes ago, so I'm sorry. And again, I'm about to post that stuff up. So look, I haven't taken attendance, and you're not going to get attendance if you haven't done anything. So you might want to get on your horse and ride. I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to put up the agenda, and I'm going to post the slideshow and the video for you to your Google Classroom. If you have questions, just chime on in. Otherwise, let's get to work. Let's finish the Nearpod. I did not give you a study.com.